This happened a few weeks ago and I'm still embarrassed. It started out as a regular Saturday morning. I woke up late, as usual, after binge-watching YouTube until 3 a.m. I dragged myself out of bed, tried to piece together some kind of breakfast, and checked my phone to see what the day had in store for me. My best friend, Matt, texted me asking if I wanted to go to this new brewery that had just opened downtown. I figured it would be a good way to spend the afternoon, and the idea of a few cold beers sounded better than anything else I could come up with. So, after getting dressed and showered, which was more out of routine than actual desire to feel clean, I hopped in my car and made my way over to meet him. Matt's a cool guy. He's the kind of person who's always up for whatever. If you wanted to run a marathon at midnight, he'd say cool and show up with a pair of running shoes. I, on the other hand, was more of a maybe I'll just sleep on the couch and drink beer while you run kind of person. But I liked the idea of this brewery. It was supposed to be a trendy, new place with a bunch of different craft beers, an industrial vibe, and some pretty solid food options. Maybe it was going to be a good Saturday after all. When I arrived at the brewery, Matt was already there, sitting at the bar with a pint in front of him. I waved and sat down next to him. He gave me a wide grin, probably because he knew I was already tired from doing nothing all morning, and handed me a menu. "So," he said, taking a sip of his beer, "are you going to be adventurous today, or are you going to stick with your usual lager?" I glanced at the menu, a wide selection of unique brews staring back at me. My usual go-to was something simple like a pale ale or a lager, but I figured it was time to step outside my comfort zone. "I'll try the IPA," I said, with more confidence than I actually felt. Matt raised an eyebrow. "Okay, Mr. Wildcard," he said. "Let's see how you do with the bitterness." The bartender came over, and I ordered the IPA. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. The beer arrived, and I took a sip. At first, it wasn't so bad, maybe a little bitter, but nothing that I couldn't handle. I made the mistake of taking another sip. And then another. Before I knew it, I'd downed half the pint. Matt was still on his first, sipping it slowly, clearly enjoying the taste. I, on the other hand, was now beginning to feel the effects of my beer choice. A few more pints later, and I was starting to feel pretty tipsy. We had ordered some food, and I was feeling better, but still buzzing. I started to get more talkative, telling Matt random stories from work and old high school memories that no one should really remember. He was laughing along, clearly entertained, but I could tell he was trying to keep things in check. He's one of those people who can hold his liquor, but I'm not. By the time we'd ordered our third round, I was pretty sure I was about to pass out on the bar. That's when it happened. I had just taken a sip of my beer and was about to start talking again when I felt a pressure in my stomach. The kind of pressure that doesn't really give you a choice. It's the kind that lets you know that things are about to get real, and you'd better find a bathroom, like, right now. I looked at Matt, panic rising in my chest, and told him I needed to use the restroom. I stood up, trying to walk as steadily as possible, and made my way to the bathroom. The brewery wasn't very big, so the bathroom wasn't far. But for some reason, my legs weren't cooperating. Each step felt like an eternity. I kept telling myself, just get there. You can make it. But as I pushed open the door to the restroom, I felt it. My stomach made the kind of noise that no one should ever have to hear. There was no time for anything else. I bolted into the stall, yanked down my pants, and sat down, hoping that this wouldn't be as bad as I feared. But it was. It was much worse. Everything came out in a chaotic, uncontrollable mess. I was sweating, I was shaking, and I felt a deep shame in my soul as I realized I had just unleashed a nightmare on the poor people who were going to have to use this restroom after me. But I wasn't done. I wasn't anywhere near done. As the waves of nausea and regret crashed over me, I sat there for what felt like an eternity. I tried to regain my composure, but each time I thought I was okay, I'd get hit with another wave of absolute terror. The noise, the smell, it was all just too much. I honestly didn't know if I could survive this, but I had no choice but to try. When I finally thought it was over, I stood up, my legs feeling wobbly. I washed my hands, trying not to look at my reflection in the mirror. I felt embarrassed beyond belief. The walk back to the bar seemed like it was going to take forever. My stomach still wasn't right, but I had to go back. I couldn't just leave Matt to deal with the aftermath of my poor decision-making. I walked out of the bathroom, trying to keep my head down as I returned to my seat. Matt looked up at me and smirked. "You okay?" he asked. I tried to muster up a smile and nod, but I could tell from the way he was looking at me that he had probably heard the commotion. He didn't need to say it, but I knew. He knew. "Yeah," I said, laughing awkwardly, "I'm fine. Just needed a minute." He raised his eyebrow again. "All right, man. Sure thing." I tried to keep my composure for the rest of the evening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire body had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I was beyond embarrassed, and even though Matt didn't say anything, I could feel the judgment. We finished our beers and left the brewery, and I'm sure he's told everyone he knows about what happened. I don't blame him, honestly. I'd probably do the same if the roles were reversed. The worst part? I'm pretty sure I have to go back to that brewery someday. I'm just hoping they've either installed new plumbing or that the staff has a very selective memory. Either way, this is a Saturday I will never, ever forget. Moral of the story? Always know your limits and never trust an IPA on an empty stomach. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU, by accidentally becoming a viral meme because of a very bad decision I made during a Zoom call. Let me backtrack a bit here. I've been working remotely for about a year now, and everything has been pretty smooth, until one day. I had a major presentation at work, something I had been preparing for weeks. It was a big project, one that could make or break my reputation at the company. This particular day, the whole team had gathered for a Zoom meeting to go over final details, and I was about to present my findings to everyone, including the CEO. My nerves were shot. To calm myself down, I decided to take a strategic approach, which was to chug a little bit of whiskey before the call to loosen up. I've always been someone who gets anxiety before presentations, so I thought a little liquid courage would help me focus and keep my nerves at bay. I wasn't planning on getting drunk, just a quick shot to take the edge off. Well, that was my first mistake. I didn't want to look like a mess during the call, so I poured myself a drink from the bottle I kept in the kitchen, took the shot quickly, and figured that would be enough. It wasn't. By the time the call actually started, the whiskey had kicked in harder than I expected. But I didn't want to back out now. I couldn't. The whole team was already in the call, the slides were ready, and I had to look confident. So, I powered through. I logged into the call, adjusted my camera, and took a seat at my desk. The meeting was set to begin in 5 minutes, so I had just enough time to double-check everything. As I logged in, I noticed that the gallery view was already on, which meant I could see everyone else's faces on the screen. Of course, the first person I saw was my boss, who was glaring at me with that intense, I want results face. Great. Just what I needed. The nerves came rushing back. My hands were shaking. I tried to steady myself by taking a couple of deep breaths, but the whiskey wasn't helping with that. It felt like the air in my office was getting thicker, and I was more aware of every sound. The faint hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, my own heartbeat thumping in my ears, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. But then, something strange happened. My camera was already on, and without realizing it, I started nervously adjusting my hair. Not a problem, right? But I didn't realize my hand had slipped and I accidentally swiped across the top of my screen. And, in that split second, I must have hit something because my webcam feed was now zoomed in on my face. This would have been fine if I looked normal, but, with the whiskey kicking in, my face was probably flushed, my eyes slightly unfocused, and I was sweating a little bit. So now, I was the guy with the zoomed-in face. It wasn't just a regular shot of my face. It was the most unflattering angle possible. I could see every pore, every wrinkle, and every inch of stress plastered on my forehead. I tried to adjust the screen, but every time I moved the camera, it only seemed to zoom in more. It was like the universe was conspiring against me. I figured, whatever, just ignore it. Maybe no one will notice. But they did. The second the call started, I could hear quiet chuckles from a couple of colleagues. I froze. One of them piped up and said, hey, my name, are you okay? You look like you're being interrogated right now. That sent a wave of embarrassment through me, but I tried to laugh it off. Yeah, just a little bit of a technical issue, I said, my voice sounding way too shaky for my liking. But it didn't end there. No, not by a long shot. As the meeting progressed, the whiskey started working its magic, or curse, and I began to feel more relaxed. I was talking freely, way more animated than I normally would have been. My presentation started off strong, but as the minutes ticked by, I found myself becoming less concerned about the details of the report and more concerned with how I looked on the screen. That was mistake number 2. By the time I hit my stride in the presentation, I was gesturing wildly, moving my hands in the air like some kind of mad scientist. The camera, still stuck zoomed in, caught every little awkward movement I made. One of my colleagues sent me a private message, "Dude, you look like you're trying to solve a crime in the middle of a heist movie." I couldn't help but laugh. Now, here's where things took a turn. In the middle of my presentation, my cat, who had been unusually quiet until then, jumped onto my desk. Startled, I instinctively reached out to grab him. Well, the cat did not want to cooperate and instead launched himself directly into my face. I barely managed to catch him before he knocked over my glass of whiskey. But I didn't realize that, in my frantic attempt to save the cat and the glass, my microphone was still on. So there I was, wrestling with a flailing cat, trying to keep it from knocking everything over, while the whole team could hear me shouting, "No, no, stop it. Stop. You little." I've never been more mortified in my life. When the cat finally calmed down and I managed to get him off my desk, I noticed that everyone was silent. The kind of silence that's not just awkward, it's the kind where you know something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. But to my surprise, the next thing I heard wasn't a reprimand. It was laughter. Apparently, during my cat battle, someone had taken a screenshot of my zoomed-in face and shared it in the company chat. And not just the screenshot of me wrestling with the cat, but also the angle that made me look like I had just seen a ghost. To make matters worse, someone started making memes out of it. The worst part? The meme took off. Fast. It ended up being shared around the company and even made it to the general work Slack channel. People were tagging each other with it, and it wasn't long before the entire office, and, later, a couple of clients, had seen the picture of me, wide-eyed and flustered, with a cat in my arms, all while presenting an important report. I spent the rest of the meeting pretending everything was fine, even though I was dying inside. By the time it ended, I had received a mix of sympathy and jokes from my colleagues. "Hey, you're a real-life meme now," one of them said. "Congrats." The meme stuck. For the next few days, my inbox was flooded with memes featuring my face. They had been photoshopped, cropped, and remixed in every possible way. There was a "can't even deal with it" meme, a "what just happened" meme, and even one that said "when the whiskey hits too hard." By the end of the week, my cat face had gone viral on the company's social media channels. I was the laughingstock of the office for a while, but surprisingly, it wasn't all bad. I had more people reaching out to me for casual chats, and people started referring to me as the meme guy, which at least broke the ice with new clients. And I guess, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a total disaster. Sure, I made a fool of myself and had an awkward Zoom call for the ages, but now I'm the guy who became a meme at work. I'll take that over the awkward silence any day. Now, whenever someone asks me about my memorable Zoom moments, I have a very different story to tell. TIFU by accidentally getting my coworker arrested at a company party. It all started like any other work event. Our company had planned a yearly holiday party, and as expected, it was held at a nice venue just outside the city. The team had been working long hours, so everyone was looking forward to the break and to blowing off some steam. It wasn't the first company event I'd attended, but it was the first one after a big promotion I'd received a few months prior. I was feeling good, maybe a little too good. I was the marketing coordinator at a mid-sized tech company, and my coworker Mike worked in the IT department. Now, Mike wasn't exactly the most socially skilled person, but he was a good guy. A bit quiet and reserved, but nothing too unusual. He had been with the company for a few years, and I always assumed that his odd demeanor was just a result of him being shy. I didn't think much of it when I saw him at the party, wearing his typical nerdy attire, a button-up shirt that was 2 sizes too big and thick glasses that made him look like he stepped out of a computer science textbook from the 90s. At the party, I was mingling, chatting with the higher-ups, and catching up with colleagues I hadn't seen much during the workday. Mike was doing his usual thing, standing near the punch bowl, quietly watching everyone, not really participating in the conversations. I remember thinking, poor Mike. He could really use some confidence. So, in my typical overzealous way, I decided to take it upon myself to help him. I grabbed a drink and walked over to him. "Hey Mike." I greeted him with a smile. "How's it going?" Mike adjusted his glasses and mumbled something that I couldn't quite hear. I assumed it was some sort of greeting or small talk. I leaned in closer, hoping to get him more engaged in the party. "Come on, man, let's have some fun. You can't just stand here all night." Mike looked around awkwardly, and I could tell he was uncomfortable. "I'm not really a party person," he said, his voice barely audible. I wasn't going to let that stop me. "Listen, Mike, you've been here for years. You work your butt off. Tonight's about relaxing, having a good time. Why don't we get a little wild? You deserve it." That's when the idea hit me. I glanced around the party and noticed a few colleagues were gathered near the bar, laughing and holding drinks. My manager, Steve, was one of them, and I knew he liked to get a bit rowdy at company events. I turned back to Mike. "How about we get a few shots in? I'll show you how it's done. Trust me, it'll be fun." Mike's face turned pale, and he started to shuffle his feet. "I'm not really a drinker," he stammered. At this point, I was really determined. "Look, Mike, you've been working hard for months, and no one's going to judge you. A couple of shots won't hurt. I'll even make sure it's something easy, nothing crazy." Mike finally gave in. "Okay, fine. But just one." "Perfect." I led Mike to the bar, where I ordered a couple of shots of tequila, one for me and one for him. As we waited, I could see Mike's discomfort growing. He was fidgeting and looking over his shoulder as though he was expecting someone to notice and reprimand him. "Hey, relax," I told him, giving him a reassuring pat on the back. "No one's going to care. It's all part of the fun." We downed the shots together, and Mike's face twisted a little at the burn, but he didn't gag or anything. He was doing fine, I thought. I was already starting to feel the effects of the tequila, but it wasn't anything too crazy. I was still in control. Or so I thought. I continued chatting with Mike, telling him about how fun the party could get if he loosened up a little more. A few more shots turned into a couple of beers, and before I knew it, I had started to get a bit loud. I was talking to Steve, making jokes, laughing a little too loudly. Mike, on the other hand, started to slur his words slightly. I should have noticed that maybe he wasn't used to drinking, but I didn't. I was too caught up in my mission to get him to have fun and let loose. The party was in full swing, and Mike had become a bit more animated, but also a bit more unsteady. That's when things started to go south. Mike had wandered off on his own to the bathroom. At least, that's what I assumed. He didn't come back for a while, and I assumed he was just taking a moment to chill out. I kept drinking and chatting with people, feeling good about myself for having gotten Mike to loosen up a little. It wasn't until about 20 minutes later that I started to feel uneasy. Mike still hadn't returned. I went to the bathroom to look for him. When I opened the door, I was startled to see a crowd gathered in front of one of the stalls. There was a man I didn't recognize, a bouncer from the venue, I assumed, standing with his arms crossed, and a police officer was talking to Mike. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Mike?" I called out, stepping closer. Mike looked up, his eyes wide, his face pale. Oh, what happened?" I asked, walking over to him. The officer turned to me and said, "Sir, your friend here has caused a bit of a disturbance. We've had reports of him yelling and acting erratically in the bathroom." I was stunned. "What? No, that can't be right. He's just shy and maybe a little tipsy, but there's no way he would." The officer cut me off. "We've already talked to the staff here. They've informed us that this individual was causing a scene and disturbing other guests." I turned back to Mike, who now looked mortified. "What happened, Mike? Did you cause a scene?" Mike just muttered something I couldn't understand, but it didn't sound good. The officer shook his head. "I'm afraid he's going to have to come with us." I couldn't believe it. I had just gotten my coworker arrested. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? The whole bathroom was still buzzing with tension, and I could feel my heart racing. I tried to apologize and explain, but it was too late. Mike was cuffed, and they escorted him out of the venue. The aftermath was brutal. Mike's arrest became the talk of the office for weeks. I felt like the biggest idiot for pushing him so hard to drink, for not realizing his limits, and for not stepping in when things started getting out of hand. I tried to reach out to Mike after the incident, but he completely cut me off. I guess I'd pushed him too far, and I couldn't blame him. The guilt was unbearable, especially knowing that I had tried to help him have fun, only to get him arrested. To this day, I still feel horrible about the whole thing. Mike never came back to the office, and we all had to deal with the fallout. If there's anything I've learned from this experience, it's to never push someone beyond their comfort zone, no matter how well-meaning you might be. The last thing you want is to end up getting someone arrested at a company party. That's a story I'll never forget. So, yeah. TIFU by getting my coworker arrested at a company party. TIFU by accidentally destroying my friend's wedding and almost losing a lifelong friendship. I should probably preface this by saying that I never expected anything like this to happen, and I don't think my friend, Anna, will ever let me live it down. Our friendship has lasted over a decade, and we've been through thick and thin. But what happened last weekend at her wedding? I still can't believe it. The events unfolded at Anna's wedding reception. First off, let me tell you that the wedding was beautiful. Anna looked like she had stepped out of a fairy tale, and everything about the ceremony was perfect, except for one little thing, me. I had been asked to give the best man speech, and after a few glasses of wine to calm my nerves, I thought I had the perfect speech prepared. Or at least, I thought I did. The reception was at a fancy venue by the lake, and everyone was in high spirits. I had spent the weeks leading up to the wedding rehearsing my speech, making sure to hit all the right notes, thank the bride and groom, talk about how they met, maybe throw in a few heartfelt jokes. I had even planned to end it on a funny, lighthearted note. A little self-deprecating humor, nothing crazy, but something to get a laugh from the crowd. The problem? I had no idea how much alcohol I would end up consuming before my turn on stage. So, to set the stage properly, I arrived at the wedding early and immediately started mingling with the other guests. Most of them were people I didn't know very well, friends of Anna and her new husband, David, but they were all friendly. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself talking to people, laughing, and honestly just having a good time. But the open bar? Oh, that was my downfall. I had a few drinks to loosen up before my speech. Just a few. Well, one drink turned into two turned into three, and by the time I was called up to give my speech, I was feeling pretty tipsy. Now, I don't want to blame the alcohol entirely, but I think it played a significant role in what happened next. I stood up in front of the crowd with my notes in hand, feeling a little too confident. I cleared my throat and started. The first few lines went off without a hitch. I thanked Anna and David for inviting me to be part of their big day and shared a few funny stories about our friendship. People were laughing, I was feeling good. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Until I reached the part where I was supposed to mention something sweet and sentimental. In my wine-fueled haze, I completely blanked on what I had originally planned to say. My mind went totally blank. All I could think was that I needed to keep talking, so I started rambling. And by rambling, I mean I started telling a story that was, honestly, embarrassing and deeply inappropriate. Somehow, I ended up telling a story from our college days. This was a story that Anna and I had laughed about privately, but I realized too late it wasn't one I should be sharing at her wedding. It was a story about the time Anna got really drunk at a party and, in a fit of wild energy, tried to climb a tree in the middle of a snowstorm. I had meant to tell it in a humorous, light-hearted way, but the more I went on, the more I could see Anna's face turning pale. But it didn't stop there. My brain, in its slightly buzzed state, thought it would be hilarious to keep going. So, I went into detail about the snowstorm, the tree, how Anna had fallen out of it, and how she had ended up with a snow-covered face in front of a crowd of strangers. I thought people would find it funny, but the mood quickly shifted. There was silence, complete, utter silence. Anna's eyes were wide, and I could see her shaking her head. Her new husband, David, looked like he had just swallowed a brick. And the worst part? I could hear a few murmurs from the crowd, like people were exchanging confused glances. I had crossed a line, and I had no idea how to backtrack. In a panic, I tried to recover by making a joke about how Anna had always been the life of the party, but instead of salvaging the situation, I made it worse. I accidentally brought up another college story, one where Anna had tried to sing karaoke after downing an entire bottle of tequila. By now, my speech was devolving into a complete disaster. I finally finished with a weak "congrats, you too," and quickly shuffled back to my seat, my face red with embarrassment. The tension in the room was palpable. Anna didn't say a word to me during the rest of the reception, and I could see David whispering something to her. I tried to make small talk with a few guests, but no one was really engaging with me. The vibe had completely changed, and I felt like I had ruined the entire evening. At some point, I decided to slip outside for some fresh air and maybe pull myself together. I was hoping things would cool off, but when I returned, things were even worse. Anna had found me. She was standing by the entrance, her arms crossed, and her face looked like she was about to either cry or scream. I approached her, trying to apologize, but she immediately cut me off. "You've got to be kidding me, right?" she snapped, her voice low but filled with hurt. I tried to explain, telling her I had just gotten carried away, that I didn't mean to embarrass her, but she wasn't having it. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" she said, her eyes brimming with frustration. "That's my wedding, and you just told embarrassing stories that no one needed to hear. How could you be so thoughtless?" It was like a punch to the gut. I had ruined her wedding day with my idiotic, drunken rambling. I spent the next several hours trying to salvage whatever was left of the evening, but every time I went to approach her, she just turned away. By the time the reception was winding down, Anna had left with David, and I was left standing there feeling like the world's biggest idiot. The next few days were full of text messages and phone calls, and not in a good way. Anna was upset, understandably so, and I had to apologize repeatedly. I offered to make it up to her in any way I could, but it was clear that I had done some serious damage. We haven't talked the same way since. In the end, I've learned a painful lesson: don't drink too much before giving a speech and, most importantly, know when to leave the past where it belongs. I never expected a simple wedding speech to cause so much drama, but now I'm facing the consequences of my actions. I'm hoping Anna and I can move past it eventually, but for now, I'm just trying to give her the space she needs. So, yeah, I really fucked up. It all started about a month ago when I decided to take a break from work and focus on my personal life. I've been working at a mid-level marketing firm for about 5 years, and while the job is decent, I needed something more. I was tired of feeling like my life was one long blur of meetings, emails, and deadlines. It was time to shake things up. So, I did what anyone would do when they need a change: I signed up for a cooking class. Now, I'm not a terrible cook, but I definitely wouldn't say I'm great at it. My usual go-to is throwing some ingredients into a pot and hoping for the best. So when I saw an ad for a gourmet cooking for beginners class, I figured, why not? The class was being held in a small studio downtown, and it seemed like it would be a fun way to break away from my routine. Plus, I had always wanted to impress people with a fancy home-cooked meal, so this seemed like the perfect opportunity. The class was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and as the day approached, I found myself getting excited. The instructor was apparently a well-known chef in the area, and the reviews of the class were glowing. I had the impression that it would be a simple, fun experience. I bought a new apron, made sure my knives were sharp, and even watched a few YouTube videos on basic knife skills so I wouldn't embarrass myself. When I arrived at the studio, I was surprised by how many people were there. The place was packed, with at least 20 people standing around and chatting, all ready to become the next Gordon Ramsay or Julia Child. I wasn't expecting such a large crowd, but I figured the more the merrier. The instructor, a middle-aged guy with a thick French accent named Philippe, introduced himself and started explaining what we'd be making that evening: beef Wellington. I didn't know much about beef Wellington, except that it seemed to be one of those dishes that everyone thinks is super fancy, like lobster bisque or caviar. Philippe promised it would be easier than it looked and assured us that by the end of the night, we'd each have our own beautiful Wellington to take home. I was skeptical but went along with it, thinking it would be a fun challenge. Philippe split us into groups of 4, and I ended up with 3 other strangers. They were all pretty friendly, so I didn't mind the group dynamic too much. Our task was to prepare the ingredients, assemble the Wellington, and then bake it. Easy enough, right? Well, that's where things started to go awry. The first thing we needed to do was sear the beef fillets. It sounded simple enough, but the pan was way too hot when I threw the fillet in, and the beef immediately started to burn. In a panic, I tried to adjust the heat, but I wasn't fast enough. My fillet turned into a charred mess, and my group members looked at me with a mix of disbelief and concern. Philippe, noticing the commotion, walked over and gave me a look that could only be described as disappointed but not yet fully judgmental. He told me to start over and gave me a new fillet. I was mortified, but I tried to laugh it off and get back on track. The next step was to make the mushroom duxelle, a finely chopped mushroom mixture that would be spread over the beef before it was wrapped in puff pastry. This seemed straightforward, except for one little thing: I had no idea how to chop mushrooms. My knife skills were so bad that I ended up with uneven, chunky pieces. I could tell that Philippe was watching me from across the room, so I desperately tried to make my mushroom mix look decent, but I was failing miserably. The texture was off, and it looked more like a chunky soup than a smooth paste. I could feel the anxiety building in my chest. After the mushroom disaster, it was time to assemble the Wellington. We rolled out the puff pastry, and this is where everything truly went downhill. The pastry was too thin, and I somehow ended up with holes in it while I was trying to wrap the beef. I couldn't get the dough to seal properly, and the beef started to slip out. By this point, my group was clearly losing patience with me. They were trying to work quickly to fix the mess I had created, but it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. Philippe came over and shook his head when he saw the state of my creation. He muttered something in French, which I'm pretty sure was some kind of insult, but I couldn't be sure. He told me to start over once again, and I was about to cry. How could I be messing up so badly? I had no idea what was going wrong, and no matter how hard I tried to fix it, it just kept getting worse. By the time we were ready to put our Wellingtons in the oven, I had ruined everything. The pastry was a mess, the beef was unevenly seared, and the duxelle had a texture that could only be described as mush. I was defeated. But the worst part? I still had to pretend everything was fine. When the class ended and we were allowed to take home our Wellingtons, I had a sad excuse for a dish. It looked nothing like the beautiful, golden brown masterpiece that Philippe had promised. The others in my group were politely trying to cover for me, but I could see the frustration in their eyes. They had worked hard on their parts of the dish, but my incompetence had dragged them down. The next day, I decided to cook the Wellington anyway, hoping that somehow, the oven would work some magic. I followed the baking instructions, but when I pulled it out, it looked like a sad, collapsed version of what it was supposed to be. The beef was overcooked, the pastry was soggy, and the whole thing was a disaster. I ended up throwing it out, which felt like a slap in the face after the hours of work I had put into it. That night, I texted my friends to tell them about the disaster. One of them responded with, "Did you at least take a picture for Instagram?" I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure if I could laugh or cry. I had a photo, all right, but it was one I'd never show anyone. I decided that maybe I should stick to simpler meals for a while. Clearly, gourmet cooking wasn't for me. As for the cooking class? Well, I signed up for another one. This time, I went for something simpler, pasta. I figured if I couldn't handle beef Wellington, at least I could manage some spaghetti. Lesson learned, sometimes you just have to accept that you're not great at everything, and that's okay. But I'll be honest, I'm not sure I'll ever look at a beef Wellington the same way again. TIFU by trying to impress my new girlfriend with a homemade dinner and almost setting my apartment on fire. So, let me start by saying that I'm not the greatest cook. I can handle basic stuff like cereal, sandwiches, and maybe scrambled eggs if I'm feeling adventurous. But when my girlfriend, let's call her Sarah, came over to my place for the first time, I decided that I would make her a homemade dinner. You know, to show off and maybe impress her a little. We had only been dating for a few weeks, and I thought this would be a nice gesture to take our relationship to the next level. Now, I should have known better. I have a history of burning toast and almost setting my microwave on fire. I've watched enough cooking shows to know that a real meal requires skill, timing, and an understanding of how hot your stove is supposed to be. But I didn't want to be that guy who orders takeout every time, so I forged ahead with a plan. I was going to make spaghetti and meatballs from scratch, because how hard could that be, right? The night started off fine. I went to the store, bought the ingredients, and returned to my apartment, which, by the way, is a small studio in a pretty quiet neighborhood. I've never been the type to entertain much, so it was a big deal for me to invite Sarah over for dinner. I set up the table with candles, dimmed the lights, and even put on some soft music. I wanted it to be a nice, cozy atmosphere. I'd never made meatballs before, but I had seen it done on TV, so I figured I could wing it. I mixed together ground beef, breadcrumbs, eggs, garlic, and seasonings. The meatball mixture looked good, so I rolled them into little balls, put them on a baking sheet, and popped them into the oven. Easy, right? Wrong. The next step was to prepare the spaghetti. I filled a pot with water, added some salt, I knew that part, and set it on the stove to boil. I turned the burner on high and then proceeded to focus all my attention on the meatballs in the oven. I didn't check the pot for a while, and before I knew it, I started to smell something burning. I went to the kitchen to find that the pot of water was totally boiling over and splattering all over the stove. The water had evaporated, and the bottom of the pot was now scorched. I panicked, grabbed the pot off the burner, and tried to salvage what was left of the water, but all I had was a half-burnt mess. Great. At this point, Sarah was due to arrive any minute, and I was starting to freak out. But I told myself it was okay, I still had the meatballs in the oven. I could recover from this. I rushed back to the oven to check on the meatballs, but what I found was not what I had hoped. The meatballs were now on fire. Somehow, I had forgotten to set a timer, and they had been in the oven for far too long. I could see the edges starting to blacken, and I could smell something worse than just burnt food. It was the unmistakable odor of charred disaster. I opened the oven to try and salvage them, but the flames only grew bigger. In a panic, I grabbed the oven mitts and tried to take the meatballs out, but they kept slipping and falling onto the bottom of the oven, adding to the mess. By this point, I was convinced I was going to burn the whole apartment down. The fire alarm went off, the whole apartment was filled with smoke, and I could hear Sarah's knock at the door. I knew she had arrived because I saw her through the peephole, looking all cute in her dress and holding a bottle of wine. She had no idea what was happening behind that door. I ran to the door, flung it open, and immediately greeted her with what I can only describe as a nervous, awkward, sweaty smile. "Hey, Sarah. Just 1 second. Dinner is almost ready." She raised an eyebrow and looked around, noticing the smoke billowing out of the kitchen. I could see the realization hit her, and she immediately asked, "Is something burning in there?" No. Just a small kitchen mishap," I said, trying to sound casual while I was in full-on panic mode. "You know, nothing to worry about." She didn't look convinced, but I didn't have time to explain. I rushed back into the kitchen, opened the windows to air out the place, and tried to figure out what to do with the charred remains of my meal. My meatballs were practically unrecognizable at this point, and I was pretty sure the pasta was beyond saving as well. I didn't want to give up, though. I didn't want her to think I was a complete disaster. But as I stood there, contemplating my next move, I realized that I was out of options. Dinner was a wreck, and no amount of optimism or quick thinking was going to fix this. So I turned to Sarah, who had quietly followed me into the kitchen, and said, "Okay, I've got to confess. This is not going well. I really wanted to impress you with this dinner, but it's kind of a disaster." She looked at the mess, then at me, and broke out laughing. It wasn't mocking or mean-spirited, just genuine amusement. "Honestly," she said between giggles, "I think this might be the funniest thing I've ever seen." I was mortified. Here I was, in front of the girl I liked, and my cooking attempt had turned into a full-blown disaster. But as she continued to laugh, I started to relax a little. I mean, at least she wasn't mad or disappointed. "I guess we'll have to order takeout," I said with a sheepish smile. She nodded and replied, "I think that's a great idea. But next time, we should probably just stick to pizza." And that was the end of my failed dinner. We ended up ordering some of the best pizza I'd ever had, and while it wasn't the romantic homemade dinner I had envisioned, we spent the evening talking and laughing. In the end, I didn't burn my apartment down, and Sarah didn't think I was a total disaster. Moral of the story? Stick to what you know, and if you're going to cook for someone, maybe test it out first. Also, if you try to impress someone with your cooking skills, be prepared for the possibility of an epic fail. But hey, at least it gave us something to laugh about for weeks. I'm just glad she still liked me after all that. So, this happened yesterday, and I'm still cringing about it. You ever have one of those days where everything goes completely sideways, and you can't believe how quickly things went from okay to an utter disaster? Yeah, this was one of those days. It all started on a pretty typical Saturday. I woke up early, feeling optimistic. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and I had no real plans for the day other than a quick run to the grocery store to pick up some essentials. You know, the usual stuff. Eggs, milk, some snacks for the week, and maybe a frozen pizza for later. Simple, right? At least, it was supposed to be. I live in a small apartment in the city, and the nearest grocery store is just a couple of blocks away. It's a pretty easy walk, but as I stepped outside, I noticed something unusual. The sidewalk was covered in a thick layer of what looked like, well, mud. Not just a little dirt, but full-on mud. It had rained the night before, but this was a bit much. I shrugged it off, put on my sneakers, and started heading out. I figured it would be no big deal. As I walked, I noticed the usual crowd of people heading to the store as well. A couple with their kid, an elderly woman with a shopping cart, and a guy in front of me who seemed to be in a hurry. I couldn't help but notice that the guy seemed to be walking a little faster than necessary, like he was in some kind of rush. I thought nothing of it, but then he did something that I would later realize was one of the key moments in my downfall. As he passed me, he took a sudden, sharp step to the left. At first, I thought he was just avoiding a puddle or something. But then, out of nowhere, he slips, stumbles, and loses his balance. In slow motion, I watched as he dropped his entire grocery bag right on top of the mud. The contents of his bag, which seemed to include something in a jar, exploded everywhere. I could hear the jar shatter as it hit the ground. Now, most people would stop, offer some help, and maybe apologize. I'm not sure why I didn't. Maybe it was the chaos of the moment or just the fact that I was too focused on not slipping in the mud myself. But whatever the reason, I kept walking. And that's where things went wrong. My shoes were starting to get a little caked in the mud, but I figured it wasn't the end of the world. I was almost at the store, so it was only a few more minutes of inconvenience. I finally reached the entrance of the grocery store, but as I was about to pull open the door, something strange happened. The guy who had dropped his groceries caught up with me. He was panting heavily, looking flustered, and had mud all over his clothes. Without any warning, he blurted out, "Hey! Do you have a phone? I need a ride." Now, for context, I'm a pretty shy guy. I'm the type who avoids confrontation at all costs, so I just sort of nodded awkwardly and pulled out my phone. In hindsight, I probably should have just said no or told him to figure it out himself. But, like I said, I wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe it was the look on his face, or maybe it was the fact that he had made a mess of his groceries, but I handed him my phone. He immediately dialed a number, talking in a rapid-fire tone. "Yeah, it's me. I need a ride now. Where the hell are you?" At that moment, I started getting a little uncomfortable. This guy seemed a bit frantic, and there was a certain level of urgency in his voice. He kept glancing at the door of the store like he was worried someone was watching him. I was just standing there, trying to mind my business, when he finally said, "I'll be right back, don't go anywhere." Okay, weird, but whatever. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there, waiting for him to return. But then, about 5 minutes later, something even stranger happened. A woman in a bright red jacket walked past me, holding a full grocery bag. She was scanning the store's entrance, looking around as if she was waiting for someone. The weird thing? She didn't look like she was supposed to be there. She was acting a little too nervous? I couldn't quite put my finger on it. A few moments later, the woman walked straight up to me and said, "Did a guy just ask you to borrow your phone?" My heart skipped a beat. I had a feeling I was involved in something that was about to go from bad to worse. I confirmed with a small nod, and she quickly said, "Don't give him a ride. He's part of a scam. They send someone to distract people while the others swipe your credit cards or steal your wallet. He's probably going to try to distract you and make you do something stupid. Just leave." I was in complete shock. Was I really standing here, getting involved in some kind of scam? I mean, I'd seen stuff like this in movies, but I never thought it would happen to me. I had been totally naive about the situation. But before I could even process what was happening, I looked over and saw the guy, the one who had borrowed my phone, walking toward me again. This time, though, there was a different person with him. A tall man in a black jacket, walking in a very deliberate, slow manner. They were clearly part of the same crew. I'm not sure why, but panic started setting in. I didn't know what to do. I quickly backed up, clutching my phone, and said to the woman, "Thanks for the warning." She gave me a nod and a brief smile before walking out of the store. As the guy and his buddy approached, I made my escape. I didn't know what their next move was going to be, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I ducked into the store, found an aisle, and took a deep breath. It was only then that I realized what a narrow escape I had just made. I don't know what would have happened if I'd actually gotten into the car with them or if I'd continued to let them distract me, but I'm just glad I didn't have to find out the hard way. That was one of the most surreal, awkward, and frightening moments of my life. Lesson learned: if someone asks to borrow your phone, just say no. Seriously. You don't know what's going on, and it's not worth the risk. As for the rest of my grocery run? Well, I ended up buying the frozen pizza and leaving the store as quickly as possible. That's about the only thing I can say was normal about the day. Never again. It all started with a simple text message. I'd been chatting with my friend from college, Tim, for a few weeks. He'd just moved to the city and was settling into a new apartment. We hadn't seen each other in years, but we picked up right where we left off. He mentioned that he was throwing a small housewarming party that weekend, and I hadn't had a good excuse to catch up with him in ages, so I immediately agreed to go. The day of the party, I had been running around all day, finishing errands and doing some work, but I was excited to see Tim. The party wasn't until 8 p.m., so I decided to head over around 7:30 p.m. I grabbed a bottle of wine from the store on my way over and texted him that I was about 10 minutes away. He responded with, "Awesome, see you soon." I pulled up to the address, parked my car, and double-checked the apartment number. It was a modest building, and I didn't see anyone else in the hallway as I walked up to his door. I knocked, and after a few moments, the door swung open. Tim greeted me with a big smile, and I could tell he was in high spirits. We hugged, and he invited me in. As I stepped into the apartment, I immediately noticed how different it looked from the one we had shared in college. The place was clean, modern, and had a nice minimalist vibe to it. The living room was spacious, with a big sectional couch, a few pieces of abstract art on the walls, and a large TV mounted to the wall. The kitchen was tucked into the corner, and I could see a couple of people already hanging out, sipping drinks and chatting. Tim introduced me to a few of his friends, and I quickly realized that I was the only one who wasn't part of their close-knit friend group. It felt a little awkward at first, but everyone was friendly enough, and I settled in, making small talk and trying to get to know them. It wasn't long before I was enjoying myself, sipping on a beer and laughing at whatever joke had just been told. After an hour or so, more people showed up, and the apartment began to fill with chatter and laughter. By this point, Tim was clearly feeling the effects of the alcohol, as he was bouncing from group to group, laughing loudly, and offering drinks to anyone who'd take them. I was starting to feel pretty tipsy myself but was still in control of my faculties. At one point, I found myself standing by the kitchen island with Tim and a couple of his other friends, chatting about old college days and sharing ridiculous stories from our past. It was one of those moments where the conversation was flowing effortlessly, and I was feeling nostalgic about the good old days. That's when things took a turn. Tim, who had been having a bit more to drink than the rest of us, suddenly went silent. He looked at me, his face turning pale. Then he mumbled something like, "Oh shit, I think I forgot something important," before darting off down the hallway toward his bedroom. The group exchanged confused looks, and I could hear him fumbling around in his room. A few minutes later, he came back into the living room, visibly flustered, holding a small white envelope. He made a beeline for the front door and said, "I need to run to the store for a second. I'll be back in a bit, just stay here and don't do anything crazy." I wasn't sure what he was talking about, but I figured maybe he'd forgotten something for the party, ice, maybe, or another bottle of booze. I barely had time to process it when he left, and the party continued. People were talking, laughing, and dancing around the living room, and I just let myself get caught up in the fun. But as the night wore on, I began to notice something odd. People started whispering and looking at their phones, occasionally chuckling or shaking their heads. No one was really paying attention to me, so I decided to go ahead and check my own phone to see if I'd missed any texts. That's when I noticed the strange messages. A group chat had been created in the middle of the party. At first, I thought nothing of it. Groups for parties like this were pretty common. But when I opened the conversation, I was greeted by a series of texts that I could not have possibly anticipated. It was from Tim. The first message read, "You know what's funny? I don't think she even knows who we are." Confused, I scrolled up and found the next message. "She's going to feel real dumb when she realizes she's at the wrong party." That's when the dread settled in my stomach. I kept reading. The next text from Tim said, "This isn't even my place, haha. I wonder how long it'll take her to figure it out." I froze. I scrolled back to the top of the chat. Sure enough, Tim had created a group with a handful of people at the party, including a couple of the people I had been talking to all night. The group was called Fool's Night Out, and as I read the rest of the messages, it became painfully clear. They had all known that I had shown up to the wrong party. My blood ran cold. Apparently, Tim had invited me to a housewarming party at someone else's apartment. The real party was a few doors down, and I had somehow wandered into the wrong one. I couldn't believe it. How had I not noticed? Tim had never mentioned anything about a wrong address, or that the party wasn't his own. I felt like an absolute idiot. All these people, including Tim, had known from the beginning that I wasn't at the right place, and they had been playing along, watching me talk and interact with them, knowing full well I was completely unaware. My heart sank. This wasn't just a simple mix-up, this was a cruel prank. I stared at my phone in disbelief. That's when I realized I had to get out of there before things got worse. I stood up from the couch, excusing myself with some half-baked excuse about needing to get home. People barely noticed as I slipped out of the living room and walked down the hallway toward the door. As I passed Tim's bedroom, I heard muffled laughter from inside. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. I didn't stop to confront him. Instead, I made my way out of the building as fast as I could, my hands shaking. I sat in my car for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. I could have confronted Tim, but honestly, I didn't want to. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing how embarrassed I was. I just wanted to put it behind me and pretend it hadn't happened. So now, here I am, feeling like a complete fool. And the worst part? Tim still hasn't texted me to apologize or even acknowledge what happened. It's been a week, and I'm still left wondering if it was all some big joke to him or if he genuinely forgot to tell me I was at the wrong party. TLDR, went to a housewarming party, only to find out I was at the wrong one. Everyone, including the host, knew it was the wrong party and watched me make a fool of myself all night. Still haven't heard from Tim. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by inviting my ex-girlfriend to my wedding. So this happened a few days ago, and I still can't quite believe it. Let me start at the beginning, and trust me, it's as bad as it sounds. A few months ago, I got engaged to my wonderful fiancée, Emily. Emily and I have been together for about 2 years now, and things are going great. She's kind, supportive, and everything I could ask for in a partner. We've had our share of ups and downs, but nothing that came close to breaking us apart. Our wedding was set for late spring, and we'd spent a lot of time planning it, getting all the details just right. Naturally, I was excited. But here's where I messed up. See, before I met Emily, I had a relationship with a woman named Sarah. Sarah and I were together for almost 3 years. It was a great relationship at first, but eventually, things started to sour. We began arguing all the time, trust started to break down, and, well, we broke up. It was messy, emotional, and painful for both of us. We didn't end on bad terms, but we definitely didn't stay in touch after we split up. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I had sent out the invites for the wedding, and I realized that I had forgotten to send one to Sarah. I thought about it for a bit. should I invite her? She wasn't a huge part of my life anymore, but I felt a sense of obligation, you know? We'd been close once, and I thought it might be a nice gesture. Maybe she had moved on, and I could just invite her as a way of showing that I wasn't holding any grudges. We had both been through a lot since we split. I talked to Emily about it, and Emily was fine with it. She told me that it was my choice, but that she didn't feel super comfortable with Sarah being there, especially since she didn't know her well and there were a lot of emotional memories tied up in Sarah for me. But Emily trusted me, and I assured her that it would be fine. So, I sent the invite. I'm sure you can see where this is going. The day of the wedding arrives, and everything is going smoothly. I'm a bundle of nerves and excitement, but it's all going well. We have the ceremony, the guests are happy, the food is fantastic, and everyone is in a great mood. Emily looks stunning, as I knew she would, and I feel like I'm on top of the world. Then, Sarah shows up. At first, I didn't notice her because I was busy talking to a few other people, but then I catch a glimpse of her, standing in the back of the room, looking a bit out of place. She's wearing this red dress that's maybe a bit too bright for a wedding, but I figure she's just being bold. Sarah isn't the type to shy away from attention, even if it's in a situation where it's maybe not the best time for it. But then I see Emily. She's standing there, staring at Sarah with this look on her face. It's a mix of confusion and concern. I walk over to Emily, trying to act casual, and she whispers to me, "What the hell is she doing here?" I try to brush it off, saying something like, "It's fine, she's just here to be friendly." But deep down, I start to feel that gnawing discomfort. I should have listened to Emily when she expressed her concerns, but I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. As the reception goes on, things start to get more tense. Emily is clearly uncomfortable, and I start to notice Sarah doing things that don't exactly make me feel comfortable either. She's chatting with some of my family members, laughing loudly, and, at one point, even dancing with some of my groomsmen. It's all a little too much. I know I invited her, but now that she's here, I wish I hadn't. I feel this weird tension building between Emily and Sarah, and I can tell it's starting to affect the mood of the entire event. The turning point happens during the speeches. My best friend, Jake, gets up to give his speech. He's a great guy, and he's always been there for me. He starts talking about how happy he is for me, and then he gets into a funny story about our time together in college. The story involves a few embarrassing moments that had Emily laughing, but the punchline, which was supposed to be lighthearted, accidentally lands a little too close to home. "Yeah, remember that time Jake almost didn't get out of a toxic relationship," he says, laughing. "And we were all like, dude, just get rid of her already, she's driving you crazy," but he couldn't see it. Then he met Emily, and suddenly, he's not texting Sarah every 5 minutes anymore. I freeze. Emily freezes. And Sarah freezes. I glance over at Sarah, and her face has gone pale. I'm mortified. I thought Jake's speech was supposed to be fun and embarrassing in a lighthearted way, but now it's just awkward. Sarah looks hurt, and I can see that she's struggling to hold back tears. Emily, on the other hand, is looking at me with a mixture of confusion and anger, her face tightening as she processes what just happened. I should go," Sarah says, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean to cause any problems." And before anyone can say anything else, she walks out. I feel terrible. Emily pulls me aside, and I can't even begin to explain what's happening. She's upset, and understandably so. She tells me that it feels like I never let go of my past with Sarah. She says it feels like I invited Sarah to the wedding as some kind of validation for the relationship we had before, and that it makes Emily feel like she's not enough. I try to explain, but I know I messed up. I should have never invited Sarah in the first place. I should have trusted Emily's instincts and listened to her concerns. The rest of the night is a blur. Emily and I fight. Sarah leaves. The whole thing is just ruined. We have a long conversation later, and I try to make amends, but I can tell Emily is still hurt. It'll take time for things to heal, and I can only hope that I can show her how much she means to me, and that I'm not holding on to the past anymore. The worst part? The wedding was supposed to be the best day of my life. But instead, it turned into one of the worst mistakes I've ever made. I learned a hard lesson that day. If you're getting married, put your partner first. Always. If they ask you to trust them, trust them. Don't let your past affect your future. If your fiancé feels uncomfortable with an ex at the wedding, just don't invite them. No matter how good your intentions are, sometimes it's just not worth it. I hope Emily can forgive me. I don't deserve her, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to show her how much she means to me. TLDR, invited my ex-girlfriend to my wedding to be nice despite my fiancé's discomfort. Ex made things awkward, and the day was ruined. It was a huge mistake. TIFU by accidentally starting a fire while trying to make a simple dinner and almost burning down my entire apartment building. So, a little backstory. I live in a fairly old apartment complex, one of those places where the walls are thin, the floors creak, and you can hear everything your neighbors are doing. But it's affordable and close to work, so I've stayed here for a few years now. I'm not the best cook, but I can usually manage to make something decent for dinner. I've been getting better at it over time, mainly by watching a few cooking tutorials and following simple recipes. The night this whole thing went down started out like any other. I was starving after a long day at work and had the grand idea to make a homemade stir-fry. Nothing too complicated, just some chicken, veggies, and soy sauce. I grabbed the ingredients from my fridge, put them on the counter, and thought, this is going to be easy. Now, let me tell you, I am the kind of person who hates using too many pans. I figured I'd just toss everything in one pan and get it over with, which might not have been the best idea. But hey, live and learn, right? I heated up the pan, threw in the chicken, and then went to work chopping the vegetables. It wasn't until I was almost done chopping the peppers and onions that I noticed something. There was smoke coming from the pan. A lot of smoke. Like, a surprising amount of smoke. I quickly turned off the heat and looked at the pan, hoping that I hadn't ruined the chicken already. It didn't look burned, but there was a weird smell. Panicked, I decided to just keep going and not let it get to me. I turned the heat back on, added the veggies, and started stirring everything around. That's when I made my first mistake. I was so focused on stirring that I didn't realize how hot the pan had gotten. I'd cranked the heat up way higher than I usually would, and it was causing the oil to start to burn. At this point, I noticed the kitchen was filled with smoke. It was thick. Like, almost foggy. I opened the windows to try to clear it out, but instead of helping, it seemed to just make things worse. The smoke was now spilling out into the living room, and I realized that my neighbors were probably already wondering if I was trying to roast marshmallows over an open flame in here. I grabbed the pan handle to move it off the burner, but the oil inside had started to smoke even more aggressively. Then, in the split second that I wasn't paying attention, the oil splashed out of the pan. Not only did it hit the stove, but some of it landed on the kitchen towels hanging from the oven door. Before I even knew what was happening, the towels had caught fire. I froze for a moment, staring at the little flame flickering on the towel. In hindsight, I should have just grabbed the towel and thrown it in the sink, but no, I panicked. I grabbed a glass of water from the counter and tossed it onto the fire, thinking that would put it out. The fire immediately flared up, as if mocking my feeble attempt to solve the problem. At this point, I was freaking out. I did the only thing I could think of, I screamed. Not like a normal, oh no, I made a mistake kind of scream, but the kind of scream you'd expect to hear from someone who's realizing they're about to lose everything. I grabbed the closest thing to me, which happened to be a kitchen pot lid, and slammed it down over the fire. The flames shrank for a second, but then they popped back up, like something out of a disaster movie. I didn't know what to do. The smoke was now pouring out of the kitchen and into the rest of the apartment. I could already hear the muffled sounds of my neighbors, probably yelling at me through their walls to put it out. My panic only made things worse, and I knew I needed to call for help. But as I grabbed my phone, I realized I had no idea who to call. Fire department? My landlord? The guy downstairs who always knocks on my door when I play music too loud? I chose the obvious answer, 911. I dialed the number, my hands shaking so much that I almost dropped my phone. A calm voice answered, and I could barely make out what I was saying through my hysteria. Fire. Apartment. I don't know what happened. I'm sure they were thinking, this guy needs some serious help. The operator asked me if I was safe, and I told her I was, but that I didn't know how to put the fire out. They assured me help was on the way, and to stay on the line. As soon as I hung up, I grabbed a wet towel and tried to smother the fire on the stove, but by now it had spread to the nearby cabinets. The entire kitchen was engulfed in smoke. When the fire trucks finally arrived, I was standing outside in my pajamas, staring at the orange glow of the flames through my kitchen window. I swear, it felt like an eternity waiting for them to show up. They rushed in, and not long after, the fire was out. A firefighter came up to me, looking at me with a mix of concern and annoyance. He told me I had been lucky. If I'd waited any longer, it could have spread to the rest of the building. As if that wasn't enough, the fire had triggered the building's fire alarm system, which meant that the entire apartment complex had to be evacuated. I'm not talking about just my floor, every single tenant had to leave their apartments. I felt like the worst person in the world. Here I was, trying to make a simple dinner, and now everyone was standing outside in the cold because of my mistake. The fire marshal came in later to inspect everything. He assured me that the fire hadn't caused any permanent damage to the building, but the kitchen would need a full overhaul. The insurance would cover it, but I still felt guilty. Not just for myself, but for the inconvenience I had caused everyone around me. In the end, I learned several things that night. First, never try to cook when you're in a hurry or distracted. Second, always have a fire extinguisher handy. Third, if you think something might catch fire, just step away and call for help right away. And finally, never, ever use a kitchen towel as a firefighting tool. Now, every time I walk past the kitchen, I remember that night. It's a constant reminder of how a simple mistake can spiral out of control in a matter of minutes. And I'll never forget the smell of burning chicken and the frantic faces of my neighbors standing outside in their pajamas, wondering who in the building could have caused such chaos. Safe to say, I'll be sticking to takeout for the next few weeks. TIFU by trying to fix my girlfriend's car, but accidentally broke her trust instead. I guess I should start with the fact that I have zero mechanical skills. Like, none. My knowledge of cars doesn't go past turn the key and pray it starts. But, a few days ago, my girlfriend, Emma, was telling me about a problem she had with her car. Apparently, it was making a weird grinding noise when she tried to drive it in reverse, and she thought it might be something with the transmission. I, on the other hand, had recently watched a few YouTube videos about basic car repairs, and I thought, hey, this could be my chance to do something nice for her. I know, at this point, you're probably already thinking, this is gonna end badly. And yeah, it did. So, I decided to surprise her by fixing her car while she was at work. Emma and I had been dating for about 6 months, and I wanted to show her that I could be the kind of guy who steps up when she needs help. Plus, I figured it'd be a good bonding experience. I'd fix the car, and she'd be impressed by my skills. Maybe she'd even love me more for it. Right? I started by looking at the car in the driveway. It was an old Honda Civic, nothing fancy, but it got her from point A to point B. I had no idea what I was doing, but I thought, how hard could it be? I pulled out the tools I had lying around from when I'd assembled IKEA furniture, which I'm also not great at, and I got to work. The first step was to jack up the car. That seemed easy enough, even though I had no idea if I was doing it right. I wasn't sure where the jack points were, but I remembered seeing a few car repair videos online, so I did my best. I raised the car up, and when it seemed stable, I crawled under it. Now, about this time, I was starting to panic. I had no clue what I was looking for. I mean, I was just hoping that I'd stumble across something obvious that would fix the grinding noise. I took off the wheels, which turned out to be more complicated than I thought. The lug nuts wouldn't budge. I ended up using a pipe to extend the wrench for more leverage. I'm sure I looked like I knew what I was doing, but trust me, I did not. Once I had the wheels off, I started poking around at the brake pads and suspension components, thinking that maybe they were causing the issue. I had no idea what I was doing, but I figured I could Google it if I needed help. As I poked around, I noticed some rust and dirt buildup, so I started cleaning that up too. It seemed logical, right? Get rid of any debris, and that would solve the problem. But here's where things started to get a little out of hand. In my expert opinion, I concluded that maybe the transmission fluid was low, which was causing the weird noises. In reality, I had absolutely no idea how to check transmission fluid, but I remembered seeing a mechanic do it in a video once. So, I went ahead and took off a few random bolts and whoops, accidentally dropped the oil pan. Now, I'm standing there, holding a part that is definitely not supposed to be detached, and I realize I've just made everything way worse. My heart starts pounding as I try to reattach the pan, but it doesn't fit back the way it was before. I've never been great with mechanical things, but this was beyond my ability to fix. I started sweating. My hands were shaking. I wasn't even sure what half the parts were, and the more I looked at them, the more confused I became. I had two options. I could either call a tow truck and admit I had no idea what I was doing, or I could keep trying to fix it and hope Emma would never notice. Being the stubborn person I am, I decided to keep going. Big mistake. The next few hours were spent fumbling around, trying to get everything back in place. I thought I might have fixed it when I managed to screw a few bolts back into place, but I was really just making things worse. By the time I was done, the car was worse off than it had been when I started. The transmission fluid was leaking, the oil pan was hanging loosely, and the brake pads I'd messed with weren't even attached correctly. And worst of all, I didn't have the faintest clue how to put it back together properly. So, what did I do? I panicked. I decided to finish the job by putting everything back in the driveway and covering it up. I figured I'd call a mechanic to fix my mess and pray that Emma wouldn't notice. I was hoping that maybe I could tell her that I tried my best, but the problem was more complicated than I thought. When Emma came home that evening, I pretended everything was fine. I greeted her with a smile, trying my best to act casual, but she could tell something was off. She asked if I had fixed the car, and I tried to explain, but instead of my usual confidence, I stuttered. My nerves were shot. I didn't even know how to start explaining the disaster I had caused. She asked if she could take it for a test drive to see if the problem was fixed. I wasn't ready for that. I stalled, saying that the car needed a few more minutes to settle, but she wasn't buying it. I could see the confusion in her face, followed by a hint of frustration. When she asked to see the work I'd done, I led her outside to show her. She took one look at the car and immediately knew something was wrong. The transmission fluid was spilling everywhere, and the oil pan wasn't properly secured. She asked, "What the hell did you do to my car?" and I froze. I tried to explain that I thought I could fix it, but instead of being impressed or understanding, Emma was pissed. I've never seen her so angry. She didn't raise her voice, but the coldness in her tone cut deep. She told me that she appreciated the effort but that I should never, ever try to fix something I knew nothing about. She said she trusted me, but now she didn't know if she could. I was crushed. I tried to apologize, but Emma wasn't having it. She called a tow truck, and when it came, she didn't say another word to me. She left for the night to stay with a friend while the mechanic fixed her car. I spent the rest of the evening staring at my phone, hoping she'd text or call, but there was nothing. I felt like the biggest idiot. When she came back the next day, we barely spoke. I tried to explain that I just wanted to do something nice, but she didn't seem to care about my intentions. It wasn't about the car, it was about the fact that I broke her trust. In trying to be the guy who could do anything for her, I ended up looking like an irresponsible jerk. I guess what I learned is that you can't just fix a problem without understanding it first. And you certainly shouldn't try to be a hero when you have no idea what you're doing. Emma and I are still together, but things haven't been the same since. The car's fixed, but my ego? Not so much. I've learned my lesson the hard way, and I'm sticking to the things I actually know how to do. And maybe next time, I'll just hire a mechanic. So, here's the thing. It all started with my mom giving me an ultimatum. I had to clean out the attic by the end of the weekend, or else. Or else what? I asked, a bit too smugly, because she's not really one to give threats that have consequences. But I should have known better. I had grown up in that house, and it was pretty obvious that my mom was getting tired of me never helping out around the house. Still, I figured I could squeeze by, get away with doing the minimum, and maybe even sneak a nap or two in between the piles of stuff. But I was wrong. The attic had been a sort of family archive. Everything that didn't fit in the house went up there. Old furniture, clothes, boxes of photos, and for some reason, a massive stack of newspapers from the 80s that my dad insisted on keeping for historical purposes. I always thought it was kind of funny how much junk was up there. But it was the kind of funny that never made me want to do anything about it. If I'm being honest, the task of sorting it all out felt daunting, and I kept putting it off. Not today, though. No, today I was determined to finally get my act together. I started early in the morning. The attic wasn't exactly a place I was excited to go into. It had this musty, ancient smell to it, like all the forgotten things of the past were resting just above me, quietly decaying. And the whole place felt like it belonged in a horror movie. The ceiling was low, and there were exposed beams, which made moving around a pain. Every step felt like it could send something toppling over, and the wooden floor creaked in protest beneath my weight. I began with a box labeled Summer Clothes, 1994, a relic from my childhood, and immediately regretted my decision. Inside, there were old swimsuits, shirts with cartoon characters on them, and what I could only describe as the world's ugliest pair of sandals. But there was something else buried deep in the box. A small, dusty book that didn't have a title on the cover, just a simple, worn leather binding. I brushed the dust off and opened it. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting inside looked as if it had been written by someone who had no business writing, at least not in a book. The ink had bled in places, and the handwriting was frantic, almost manic. I flipped through it, intrigued, and found that it was some kind of journal. The entries, written in a jumbled mix of dates and strange references, told the story of a man named Thomas who had lived in this very house during the early 1900s. Apparently, Thomas had been obsessed with something. What that something was, though, was never clear. There were references to strange noises, objects moving on their own, and odd rituals involving candles and symbols. At first, I laughed it off. The guy was obviously some eccentric, a product of his time, but then I came across a passage that caught my eye. Tonight, the voices were louder than ever. I fear the house may be alive. I have to warn her before it's too late. I had no idea who her was, but the whole thing felt off. I shrugged it off and tossed the book aside, deciding it was just the ramblings of an old man who had probably spent too much time alone. That's when I noticed something strange. From the corner of my eye, I saw a faint movement. A shadow. At first, I thought it was just the way the light hit the old rafters, but the longer I looked, the more I was convinced something was there. It was then that I heard it. A creaking sound. Very faint, but unmistakable. It was coming from the far end of the attic. I turned slowly, expecting to see a mouse or a bird's nest. What I didn't expect to see was an old wooden chest that I was sure had never been there before. I was certain of it, because I'd spent plenty of time in this attic growing up, and I'd never once seen a chest tucked away in the corner. Not to mention, it looked like it had been there for decades. The wood was worn, and the metal clasps had oxidized to the point that they almost looked like they were made of rust. My heart skipped a beat as I approached it. Every instinct told me to leave it alone, but curiosity got the better of me. I reached for the rusty latch, which creaked in protest when I lifted it. Inside, there was only a single object, a small, ornate box. The box had delicate carvings, almost like symbols. I didn't recognize them, but they looked strangely familiar. Without thinking, I reached for it, and as soon as my fingers touched it, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I pulled the box out, and it felt heavier than it should have been. I couldn't explain why, but something about it felt wrong. My palms were sweaty as I turned the box over, and that's when I saw it. A single word carved into the bottom of the box, Thomas. I froze. I didn't know what to make of it, but at that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The air in the attic seemed to shift, and suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was alone up there anymore. I don't know how to explain it, but the feeling of being watched was intense, and it made my skin crawl. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that made sense in the moment. I ran. I grabbed the box, slammed the attic door shut, and didn't stop until I was downstairs, sitting in the living room, trembling. My mom was still out running errands, and I needed to process what had just happened. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I would hear strange noises at night, whispers that I couldn't explain. At first, I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just the house settling, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. A week later, I decided to do some research. I went to the local library and found a few old newspaper clippings about the house, hoping to find some clue that might explain what had been going on. That's when I came across an article from 1923. It mentioned a man named Thomas who had lived in the house and disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The article also referenced a series of unexplained deaths that occurred in the town around the same time. The connection to my house seemed undeniable. That's when I knew. The box, the journal, the voices, the shadows, I had stumbled upon something much darker than I had ever imagined. Something that was tied to my family's house, something that had been lying dormant for decades, waiting for the right person to uncover it. But now, I don't know what to do. I've locked the box back in the attic, but I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching me. And no matter how much I try to convince myself that it's all in my head, I can't help but wonder if I've unleashed something that I can't put back. At this point, I'm terrified to go near the attic again, but part of me knows that I'll have to go back up there soon. The house is never going to let me forget what I've found. TIFU by going on a first date with a girl and making an embarrassing mistake that led to me losing her interest forever. It all started when I met Jenna on a dating app. We had been chatting for a couple of weeks, and our conversations had flowed pretty well. We had a lot in common, both were into hiking, movies, and cooking, so it seemed like we were a perfect match. After a couple of weeks of texting back and forth, she finally agreed to meet up for a date. I was pumped. I mean, this could be it. The one. Or at least, a decent date. We decided on going to a casual coffee shop near my place. It wasn't fancy, but it had a great vibe, and I thought it would be a nice setting to get to know each other in person. I had made sure to look my best. I had spent extra time picking out my outfit, combing my hair, and even watched a couple of YouTube videos on how to smell nice but not overpowering. I was as prepared as I could be. The day of the date arrives, and I'm a bundle of nerves. I show up 15 minutes early to make sure I look cool and collected. I stand outside the coffee shop, waiting for Jenna. My palms are sweating, and my heart is racing. She told me she'd be wearing a red jacket, so I keep my eyes peeled. I start pacing a little, thinking about how I'm going to keep the conversation going, hoping I won't say anything dumb. She finally walks up, and my first thought is, wow, she's even more beautiful in person. She's smiling and waving, and I return the smile and wave awkwardly. The conversation starts off well enough, just the usual stuff. asking about each other's day, work, and how our week had been. I'm relieved that it doesn't feel as awkward as I feared it might. We chat about everything and nothing, and the coffee shop is pretty chill, so it feels like we've got a good rhythm going. At one point, I'm feeling a bit more confident. The conversation is flowing nicely, and I think she's laughing at my jokes. So, I figure it's time to mention something I thought would be cute. I tell her, I've been working on my cooking skills lately. I'm really getting good at making pasta. Jenna's eyes light up. She says, "Oh, I love pasta. What kind of pasta do you make?" Here's where I make my first mistake. Instead of just saying something simple like, "Oh, I make a mean spaghetti bolognese," I decide to go into more detail. I start telling her about the fancy pasta machine I bought, the flour I use, and how I've mastered the art of making homemade noodles. I go on and on about the intricacies of pasta making, completely oblivious to the fact that Jenna's face is slowly losing its excitement. That's cool," she says, but her voice trails off a little. It doesn't help that I'm still talking about the various kinds of flour and how different textures affect the noodles. I finally stop myself when I notice she's looking around the coffee shop, clearly losing interest. I try to recover. I take a deep breath and switch topics. "So, what's your favorite type of pasta?" I ask, trying to steer the conversation into a more normal direction. She smiles again, but this time, it's a little forced. "I like lasagna. Classic, Lasagna." I respond enthusiastically. "Yeah, I've made that too. It's actually a really simple dish, but a lot of people mess it up with too much cheese or the wrong sauce." I'm completely oblivious to the fact that I'm still talking about food, and specifically, the kind of food that most people would consider a basic comfort meal. I go on to explain how I use this super rare truffle oil to make my lasagna stand out, which, looking back, probably sounded pretentious. Jenna, bless her, nods along politely, but her eyes are glazing over. I'm still totally unaware of how much I've lost her attention. At this point, she looks down at her coffee, takes a sip, and says, "That's cool. So, do you like to travel?" I'm relieved to hear something else that isn't pasta-related. "Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been to Italy twice. In fact, when I was there, I took a cooking class to learn authentic pasta making." I can see the wheels turning in her head. I'm talking about Italy now, but guess what? I bring it back to pasta. I start telling her about this little Italian town I visited, where I learned to make the best fettuccine ever. Jenna's smile is tight, but I'm still oblivious. Then, I notice her looking at her phone. She quickly checks the time and says, "Oh, I actually have to go in about 20 minutes. My friend is having a thing later tonight." My heart sinks a little. I try to mask the disappointment, but it's hard. I was hoping to extend this date longer, but I try to play it cool. "No worries. I totally get it. It's been really great chatting." She nods, standing up to gather her things. I stand with her, trying to make one last-ditch effort to salvage the evening. "Maybe we can grab dinner sometime? I know this awesome little Italian restaurant that makes the best pasta," and she cuts me off gently but firmly. "Yeah, that sounds nice. I'll text you." I give her a forced smile, feeling the weight of the situation. We hug awkwardly, and she walks out of the coffee shop without looking back. The ride home is brutal. I can't stop thinking about what went wrong. I replay the entire date in my head, cringing every time I realize how much I'd talked about pasta. It hits me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just talking about food. I was talking about it like I was some kind of pasta expert, when in reality, I was probably just sounding like a guy who had no other personality traits. I never heard from Jenna again. After a couple of days, I tried texting her, saying something casual like, "Hey, I hope you're doing well. Had a great time the other day." But she never responded. I was left hanging. I later saw on her social media that she was dating someone else. Looking back, I realize I made a huge mistake. The lesson here isn't to avoid talking about your interests, but to balance them with genuine curiosity about the other person. People don't want to hear you talk about the same thing for an hour, especially if it's something that could come across as pretentious. I turned a fun, casual date into an hour-long lecture about pasta. And now, I'll probably never see Jenna again. So yeah, TIFU by making my first date all about pasta and losing any chance I had with a girl I actually liked. So, this happened just a few days ago and I'm still processing it. I don't know if I'll ever live this down, but here goes. This is a story of how I, 25M, completely messed up a simple surprise date for my girlfriend, 24F, and managed to make everything go wrong in the most spectacular fashion. It all started when I decided I wanted to do something special for my girlfriend. We've been together for almost 2 years, and I thought it was about time to show her that I could do more than just the regular dinner and movie date nights. I know, how could I mess up something so simple, right? But, you'll see. I wanted to surprise her with a romantic evening that would be totally unexpected. The plan was to pick her up from work, take her to a cozy little lakeside cabin that I rented for the night, and surprise her with a candlelit dinner overlooking the water. I even got her favorite wine, a fancy cheese board, and a small box of chocolates. I thought I was being thoughtful and considerate, right? The day before the big surprise, I went over the plan 100 times. I figured out the perfect timing. I knew what kind of flowers she liked, so I had those delivered to her workplace in advance. Everything was supposed to be perfect. Or so I thought. Now, here's where the first mistake happens. I've never been the most organized person, but I had this idea that everything would fall into place on the day. I got off work early, ran to the cabin to make sure everything was set up, and even lit some candles to set the mood. It was absolutely picturesque, with the sun beginning to set, the breeze just right, and the sound of the water lapping gently against the shore. I felt like a freaking romance movie hero. Then, disaster struck. I realized I'd forgotten the key to the cabin. Panic set in. I thought maybe I could find a way in through the back door, but no luck. I called the cabin owner, but of course, they didn't pick up. It was getting late, and I had to figure something out, so I quickly ran to a nearby store to buy a bottle of wine as an excuse for leaving. It wasn't the best idea, but I needed a way to buy time. When I finally returned, I parked the car a few blocks away so she wouldn't see the cabin from the road. By then, I was in full-on stress mode. I hadn't even realized that she had been calling and texting me to ask why I hadn't arrived yet. But I figured I could salvage this by picking her up and taking her to a new spot that I thought would impress her even more. But, here's the thing, I had no backup plan for a new location. So, I drove back to her office and pretended that I was just running late. She didn't suspect anything because I've been late a few times before. When she finally got in the car, she seemed so excited. She had been talking about how her day went and how much she was looking forward to the surprise date. Meanwhile, I was internally panicking. I'd already messed up the biggest part of the plan, and now I had to think fast. I ended up telling her that there was a slight change of plans, but I had a new spot picked out for us. The issue was that I had no idea where we were actually going. My GPS was failing me, and I hadn't really researched alternatives because I was so focused on the cabin. I just drove aimlessly for a while until I remembered there was a small park I could take her to. It wasn't exactly the romantic lakeside cabin, but it was close enough. Right? So, I parked the car in the park lot and told her I had a surprise waiting at the picnic table. She was so eager to get out and see what I had planned. I tried to stay positive, but she could probably sense something was off. When we got to the picnic table, I pulled out the wine and cheese board. But, there was an issue. I forgot the corkscrew. I tried using a knife to open the bottle, but I'm not exactly a wine expert, so the cork crumbled into the bottle. Not only was it unsightly, but I also had no way of fixing it. She just stared at the bottle and then at me, wide-eyed. "Are you okay?" she asked, clearly concerned, but trying to hide her confusion. "This isn't quite what I imagined." "I swear, everything will be fine," I said, trying to hold it together. I offered her a piece of cheese, but instead of a cute little romantic gesture, I accidentally dropped the whole cheese board onto the grass. I didn't even realize what had happened until she let out a laugh, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that made me feel better. It was the kind of laugh that made me realize she was starting to realize just how far from my plan we had strayed. "Babe," she said softly. "I don't get it. I thought we were going to a cozy cabin by the lake. This is nice, but it's not what you promised." I felt my stomach drop. This was when I realized how much I'd messed up. I had built up this evening in my head, and now she was seeing just how much of a disaster it was turning out to be. I tried to salvage the evening by telling her we could still have fun, but the mood had shifted. She was being so sweet, trying to make the best of it, but it was clear she was disappointed. Finally, after about an hour of trying and failing to make conversation, I suggested we head back. But when I started the car, the engine sputtered and stalled. The car wouldn't start. Of course, it wouldn't. I tried everything I could, but it wouldn't budge. At this point, my girlfriend was trying not to laugh at my complete and utter failure. It was the longest 20 minutes of my life as we waited for roadside assistance. I think I was more embarrassed than she was at that point. When we finally made it home, I apologized profusely. She gave me a hug and told me it was fine, but I knew deep down it wasn't. She'd been so excited for a special night, and I had turned it into the most unromantic, awkward, and frustrating experience possible. It wasn't until later that night that she admitted to me that she wasn't disappointed in the fact that the night went wrong. She was disappointed because she realized that I hadn't really thought through the details. I had focused so much on trying to create something grand and unexpected that I didn't consider the small, meaningful things that would have made it memorable in the right way. The next day, I made it up to her by planning a low-key, thoughtful date that actually turned out to be perfect. We went for a walk in the park, had lunch at a local cafe, and spent the afternoon chatting. No grand gestures, no big surprises, just quality time together. It was simple, but it meant more than all the failed attempts at trying to impress her. Lesson learned: sometimes, the most meaningful moments don't need to be over the top. They just need to be sincere. TIFU by accidentally ruining my friend's wedding and getting kicked out of the reception for being too dramatic, so, this is my story. It's a mess, and I'm still cringing about it a week later. But, here goes. It all started about 2 months ago when my best friend, Sarah, announced that she was getting married to her longtime boyfriend, Steve. They've been together for what feels like forever, and I was thrilled for them. I really wanted everything to go perfectly. I'm the type of person who goes all in on any event that's important to me, so I was already mentally preparing myself to help with the wedding planning and to be her right-hand woman. I offered to help her with anything, from the flowers to organizing the seating chart, because I love her and I really wanted everything to go smoothly. She accepted my offer graciously and we dove headfirst into planning mode. Sarah and Steve's wedding was going to be a big deal. A beautiful venue out of town, a fancy catering company, the works. Honestly, I don't know how they could afford it, but they did. I was beyond excited to be part of the day, especially because I was going to be one of the bridesmaids. I was in charge of helping with the pre-wedding events and organizing some of the smaller details. We had a small bridal shower, some casual pre-wedding dinners, and all that jazz. Now, here's where things started to take a dark turn. The week before the wedding, Sarah started getting a little tense. She was stressing about everything: the guest list, the food, the flowers, the timeline. It felt like she was on the verge of a breakdown, and I kept trying to reassure her that it would all work out. But she was hyper-focused on everything going wrong. Naturally, I took on more of the responsibility to alleviate her stress, which meant I was coordinating a lot of things without her really being involved in the decisions anymore. Here's the kicker: one of the things that Sarah and Steve were really adamant about was having an open bar at the wedding. They wanted it to be a fun celebration, not a stiff and formal affair, and alcohol would be flowing freely. As the days leading up to the wedding passed, I started to get concerned about one of the other bridesmaids, Emily. Emily and I were college roommates, and she has a bit of a reputation for being wild when it comes to alcohol. She has a tendency to drink too much and then get a little, let's just say, chaotic. We had been at a few parties together where she got way too drunk and made some awkward situations happen, so I was honestly nervous about what might go down at the wedding. I tried to warn Sarah about Emily. I told her that I had some concerns, but Sarah brushed it off, thinking it wouldn't be an issue. After all, we're adults, right? People can handle their alcohol responsibly, especially at a wedding. Sarah didn't want to think about it too much, and I didn't want to be the buzzkill bridesmaid, so I dropped it and just hoped for the best. Fast forward to the wedding day. Everything was gorgeous. The venue was perfect. The weather was absolutely beautiful. Sarah's dress was stunning, and Steve looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine. I was honestly in awe of everything, and I couldn't wait to get the party started. We had the ceremony, which was emotional and heartwarming, followed by the reception. The food was amazing, the music was perfect, and the atmosphere was absolutely electric. But then Emily showed up. I had noticed she was already tipsy at the ceremony, which wasn't surprising. She'd taken a few shots with her friends before she got to the venue. At first, it wasn't a big deal. She was laughing, dancing, and generally in a good mood. However, it quickly escalated. Emily started ordering drink after drink. She was stumbling around, flirting with random people, and being a little too loud. I tried to keep an eye on her, but I was also trying to enjoy the wedding. Eventually, she had one too many. Things took a turn when Emily started trying to dance with Steve. She was all over him, way too touchy-feely, and everyone could see it. Sarah saw it too, and her face went from joy to confusion to concern in a matter of seconds. I could tell she was trying to hold it together, but the look in her eyes was pure panic. At this point, I was officially worried. Emily's behavior was getting more erratic, and Sarah was clearly uncomfortable. She pulled me aside and whispered, "Can you please do something about Emily? She's making Steve really uncomfortable." I nodded and went over to Emily, trying to calm her down. But it wasn't easy. She was having way too much fun and didn't want to listen. I asked Emily if she could maybe take a break from dancing for a while, but she got defensive. "What's your problem?" "It's a wedding." "Let me have fun," she slurred at me. I told her that I was just trying to help and that she should maybe sit down for a bit. This didn't go over well. She accused me of trying to ruin her fun, and suddenly, we were in the middle of a full-blown argument. The guests started noticing, and Sarah's mom came over, trying to separate us. But then, in the heat of the moment, Emily yelled something that I will never forget: "If I'm ruining your wedding, maybe you should just fire me from being your bridesmaid." I was shocked. People were staring. The tension in the air was palpable. And for some reason, I lost it. I snapped back, "You are ruining it, Emily. You're making Sarah's day miserable. Get it together." And then, to make things worse, I told her she was acting like a total drunk mess. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't stop myself. Sarah overheard this, and she snapped too. "Enough," she yelled. "I asked you to handle this, and now you're making it worse. Get out of my wedding." At that point, the room went silent. Emily, still visibly drunk, stormed off, and Sarah turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I didn't ask for this drama. I don't know why you've made this about you." And that's when I realized what I had done. I had gotten so wrapped up in trying to protect her from Emily that I had made the situation 10 times worse. Sarah's wedding day was overshadowed by our fight, and it was all my fault. I had tried to be the hero, but I ended up being the villain instead. I was escorted out of the reception. Emily, thankfully, was too drunk to remember much the next day. Sarah and I haven't spoken much since. I've apologized repeatedly, but I know it'll take time for things to heal. I don't know if our friendship will ever be the same, but I've learned a hard lesson. I should have stayed out of it and let Sarah handle her own problems. Instead, I let my emotions take over and ruined her special day. TLDR, tried to protect my best friend's wedding from a drunk bridesmaid, got too involved, ruined the day, and got kicked out for being dramatic. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with my cooking skills and almost burning down the building. So, I've never been much of a cook. Growing up, I was always more into video games than anything practical like cooking or fixing things. My mom was an amazing cook, but I never really paid much attention to how she did it, assuming it was just natural talent or magic or something. So, I ate out a lot and survived on instant noodles. That all changed a few months ago when I started dating this girl, Rachel. Rachel is the kind of person who can make a 5-star meal out of whatever random stuff is in her fridge, and she actually enjoys it. I've been so impressed with her cooking skills, and to be honest, I kind of felt bad about always asking her to go to restaurants or ordering takeout every time we hung out. I wanted to show her that I could be a real adult, so I came up with this brilliant idea to cook her dinner for our anniversary. Now, here's the part where I should have known better. I've never cooked a full meal from scratch before, and my idea of cooking is burning toast and occasionally microwaving a frozen pizza. But, I was determined to impress her. I figured I could make something relatively simple as spaghetti and meatballs. How hard could it be, right? I went to the store to pick up all the ingredients: ground beef, pasta, marinara sauce, some random spices I had no clue about but saw on a YouTube video, and breadcrumbs. Simple enough. When I got home, I decided I would cook the meatballs first. I'm watching a cooking tutorial while I roll the meatballs into little spheres of what I hope will not turn into a soggy mess. I put the oil in the pan, heat it up, and throw the meatballs in. Immediately, a massive cloud of smoke erupts. At first, I just think it's the oil, so I crank up the exhaust fan and open a window. But the smoke keeps coming. I check the meatballs and they're, well, not looking like meatballs anymore. They're looking like small, charred blobs of regret. The outside is black and crispy, and the inside is still raw. Great. I try to salvage them, but every time I flip them, more smoke pours out. It's like I'm trying to make a bonfire in my kitchen. So, I panic. I throw open the windows and doors in a desperate attempt to air out the place. Meanwhile, I'm on my phone frantically Googling how to not burn meatballs. I did what I thought was the only sensible thing: turn off the stove and call Rachel to tell her I'm running a bit behind. I need her to think I'm handling this like a pro, so I just tell her everything's fine, just a little delay, but I'm making something amazing. She's really sweet about it, telling me not to stress, but I can tell she's trying to be supportive because she knows I'm not exactly a kitchen wizard. But I'm determined to get it right. I can't let her think I'm some bumbling idiot who burns water. I'm already halfway into this disaster, so I'm not backing out now. Next, I go back to the meatballs. I don't know what went wrong, but there's something deeply wrong with the texture. I can't figure out how to get them to stick together. Every time I try to flip them, they disintegrate into a greasy mess of meat, oil, and breadcrumbs. This isn't the warm, inviting, professional-looking dinner I had in mind. This is a horror show. I decide to salvage the situation by moving on to the sauce. How hard could that be? I pour the marinara into a pot, but as I heat it up, I realize it's not thick enough for my liking. So, I decide to add some random spices I've never used before to give it a unique twist. It's at this point I realize I have no idea what I'm doing. After tossing in a few too many shakes of chili flakes and garlic powder, I taste the sauce. The result? A fiery, unpleasantly spicy mess that tastes like it could have come out of a can of liquid fire. I try to adjust by adding sugar, hoping to balance the flavor, but it just gets worse. Now I have a sauce that's way too sweet and way too spicy, basically a nightmare. So I abandon the sauce for a moment and focus on the spaghetti. I boil the pasta, but of course, I forget about it for a good 5 minutes, and it's now mushy and falling apart. I drain the pasta, and it turns into a sad, clumpy heap that looks like someone tried to reassemble a broken bridge made out of noodles. By now, my apartment is covered in a layer of smoke, and the kitchen looks like a disaster zone. I've also learned that when you cook something badly, it's not just the meal that suffers, it's the entire vibe. The entire apartment smells like charred meat and burnt sugar, and I'm pretty sure my neighbors are trying to figure out if there's a fire in the building. At this point, Rachel calls me to check in, and I realize I'm so deep in my own mess that I don't know what to say. I tell her I'll be ready in just a few minutes, but I'm fairly certain she's getting suspicious because there's no way I could have cooked anything edible at this point. I start putting together what's left of the meal: mushy noodles, charred meatballs, and some sauce that could double as a toxic waste. I arrange it on the plate like I'm some kind of food stylist, but it looks like something out of a cooking fail video. But I'm committed now. I plate it, take a picture, and set it on the table, praying that somehow it'll taste okay. Rachel finally arrives, and I greet her with a nervous smile. She's kind, as always, and tells me it smells interesting, which is definitely not the glowing review I was hoping for. She takes a bite of the pasta, and I can tell she's struggling to keep a straight face. She tells me it's fine. But her eyes keep darting to the door, probably considering if she should make a quick exit. I can't watch her suffer through this anymore, so I cut to the chase. I'm so sorry, I have no idea what I was thinking. I was trying to impress you, but this is a disaster. She laughs and reassures me, it's okay, seriously. I'm not picky about food, but maybe next time, let's just go out to eat. We laugh about it, and thankfully, we ended up ordering pizza and watching a movie. But that night, I realized that sometimes, the effort is what counts, even if the execution is a complete disaster. We still had a great time, and that's what mattered most. So yeah, TIFU by thinking I could cook a fancy meal to impress my crush, only to create a kitchen disaster and nearly set off the smoke alarm. Lesson learned: never underestimate the power of takeout. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.